Well, welcome to the session. Thank you very much for being here. My name is Joe, and I know there's a lot of sessions to choose from, so I'm totally fired up that you guys picked this one. It's definitely going to be an interactive session. Any questions, at any point in time, feel free to kind of put your hand up if you're confused or if I said something incorrectly. But this is definitely an interactive session. I'll move around a little bit. And what I'm doing here just to get you guys started is I have a story. I'm using the Tableau story. So I always like to mention this to people that are either, whether you're an introductory or advanced level user of Tableau. The story features are great if you work with executives that are very accustomed to PowerPoint deck handouts. So what we've done where I work is we basically just said, listen, we want to keep it in Tableau because those charts, those graphs, those scatter plots, whatever we're doing is a whole lot richer when you're in Tableau than in a PowerPoint slide. So that's what we're doing here. But I'm going to make sure you guys are on your toes and I'm on my toes as well. So I'm going to do this little exercise. With my team, I always take ourselves through a couple little exercises, make sure they're paying attention. So I'm kind of making sure you guys are paying attention. And it's about context. So much of what you guys and what I do in the sense of handling and using data, to me, one of the greatest risks is losing context, okay? You read the data, you think you understand the data, you have actionable insights from the data, and lo and behold, you, over a period of time, realize, oh man, I didn't realize this. I never recognized this variable. And a lot of that has to do with context. So I'm going to take you all, I'm not going to ask you to read many things, but I will ask you to read this one. So I'm a bike rider, so I want to just give you a scenario. There's two people that ride their bikes to work. Person A has an 8-mile ride, takes him or her about 34 minutes. Person B, a little bit longer ride, 10 miles, does it in 43 minutes. So which person's the better cyclist? Okay, now, we're all good data people, so we know the very first step will be we need to come up with a formula. And I'm going to make it a little bit easy for you guys because the formula is very simple. It's speed is distance divided by time. So as you can see, we can apply this formula for person A, person B, and we could quickly realize that the average speed for person A is about 14 miles per hour, and the speed for person B is 13.8. Naturally, we know who's the better cycler. And of course, you guys see this coming. It's not quite that simple, okay? And that's because of context. Context entails an understanding of all the broader characteristics or variables that might influence an activity. So in this case, think about if you're a bike rider, there's a lot of variables that would influence your speed. There's wind. Okay, my dad is a retired NASA engineer. So when I was showing him this slide, he's like, oh, everyone knows that formula, Joseph. This is, drag and, the correlation of wind angles and velocity of the wind itself. That has a massive impact on your speed, as are such things as body weight. I do this presentation often with another guy who weighs about 40 pounds less than me, and we did the math, and literally, if we were pumping the bikes at the same power level, he'd be ahead of me by, I think, in a 10-mile ride, he would beat me by about 4 minutes. So weight has an enormous impact on this equation, as are other things. Obviously, there's hills, there's environment, there's crosswalks, there's stopping for lights, tires create friction, all that adds into the speed. So really, the key to what I'm saying, and what I always want to have as the backdrop, is the importance of really asking the right questions. When you're doing your data mining, make sure your questions, you're looking and wording and being open to what it is you're using that data for. Okay, my name is Joe Roche. I work for the Department of Health and Human Services, an agency that's called the Health Resources and Services Administration. I am a former IT guy for about 20 years that for the past 4 years has jumped into the finance world. And I will tell you, it was like learning a second language, of course. I had accountants and auditors that worked for me, and the terminologies were a little bit foreign to me. But it's been probably the best decision, best career move I've ever had in my life. I've got to learn an entire new domain area and really made some amazing progress. So, first thing, agenda's really quick. We're going to just talk about a little bit about my agency, the acronym. We're big into acronyms. It's HRSA. Think of it, HRSA. Okay, that's how I will pronounce it on occasion, HRSA. Our challenge, as the same challenge for many of you, is just to help support data-driven decision-making. That is ubiquitous. It's to every public, private sector, that is the challenge. And for my office, my group, what we did was we've created an environment that really supports and fosters good data analytics. And then most importantly, I want to show you guys, this is a high-risk, high-reward demo because I'm connected through a VPN, through my MiFi, to a Oracle database and a big set of data sources. But it's going to work. Don't read these words. I'm required by my agency to use this stock slide. What I will tell you about my agency is real simple. There's 13 operating divisions within the Department of Health and Human Services. Is anyone from HHS in the audience? Okay. There are 13, and everyone knows the National Institutes of Health, the Centers for Disease Control, Food and Drug Administration, Medicare, Medicaid. Well, our agency is one of those 13, and I think of ourselves as like a safety net. Like imagine like the circus with the acrobats, and there's the safety net that's underneath them. So what we do is we provide financial assistance to populations that are really, really vulnerable throughout the United States. And so mothers and small children, or HIV/AIDS patients, or folks that need healthcare access and they live in real rural communities, or they're in high urban, underserved areas. Okay, we provide about $13 billion a year in some sort of assistance to to the United States. And we certainly support, I think the number of community health centers, something to the effect that we are in basically about 60% of the community health centers throughout the United States. Most of you guys know this probably as well as I do, and that's what does a chief financial officer do, but I will just state it to let you know what we do, at least at my agency. And the first bullet is really, I love this one because I make it just one bullet: manage all budget activities. So it's real simple, and it probably takes about 50 people in our agency to do it, because budget at the federal level it's probably one of the most amazing processes you've ever seen. It starts 2 years in advance. So, which means we are now in the end of FY19. We're already working on our FY21 budget. Okay, and what do? They create lots of Word documents and lots of spreadsheets that has to get submitted to Congress, that eventually gets to the president, and then ultimately the monies get appropriated, okay? And then there's the entire execution arm, okay? The CFO is certainly responsible for all the financial accountability. So one of the truest risks of our agency is the mission of our agency. It's focused on the underserved. So a lot of times, the folks that we give financial assistance to, they're high-risk recipients. I mean, they might have a one-person health center we're funding. They've never had a grant in their life. They don't know all the rules of how to use the money, how to report, what's allowable, what's unallowable. And so from a financial accountability or improper payments, there's a lot of risks that are associated with the business we conduct. We also perform the testing and the oversight of internal controls. Internal controls kind of go beyond even just financial management, budget management. It could extend into other major transaction cycles outside of that. And the last one is really kind of like the big charge, and that's our enterprise risk management. I think the federal government is a little bit slower than private industry to really take on certain aspects, and this is one of them. ERM, enterprise risk management, is kind of looking at risk. It goes far beyond just the financial reporting set of things, and it starts to look at all the other elements of risk in domain areas that have an impact on financial and business operations. So and these are some of the demos I'm going to show you are related to these areas. All right, big data. So an agency of our size, we, like I said, have about $13 billion in annual transactions on any given year. We have countless number of transactional systems that process all of these daily activities. You have travel systems, you have grant systems, you have credit card systems, you have payroll, you have scholarships and loan repayments. And as you guys can attest to in your worlds, these are all discrete systems that support with workflow and role-based access controls the entire process for committing a financial transaction. Okay, and as we have been hearing for days, oftentimes these data, not oftentimes, almost every time, there is a complete lack of standardization. The design of the systems didn't necessarily include any consideration of how other data attributes were being collected from other systems. So that's a challenge or an opportunity for us. And for us, and I will say this is an opportunity, but it's a dependency on shared services. And at the federal level, what we've tried to do is, if there are very centralized functionalities that every agency performs, like HR, like grants or contracts, you create a shared service provider. And they can be across the federal government, or they could certainly be within a department or agency. And these shared service providers, they do it for a fee, you pay them the money, and they process and they handle all your transactions, and oftentimes what they don't do is give you your data back. They'll let you run reports, but I don't want reports, I want the data. I want access to the data. And that is a challenge. And of course, real-time access. So we want real-time access to all these different data sources. So this is a picture, and for us, it resonates very clearly. I always this is literally Katherine, or Kathy. She works, and she's an accountant. She's a risk manager at my agency. And very much like most of you folks, to do her job, she requires access to many, many different data sources. So whether they are desktop applications, or they are HRSA systems, or whether they are cloud ERM solutions or shared service providers, that's part of her daily business. And as most of us know, you go about retrieving your data in a siloed manner a lot of times. Not all times, and a lot of times, where to run the reports that you need for the grants, you have to log in, have certain role-based authorities to generate your PDF or your Excel or whatever that report happens to be. But you're doing that across many different systems throughout the day. And when you're trying to review potentially millions of transactions, it's horrifically inefficient. It's horrifically inefficient. And identifying any trends or anomalies or patterns, it could be almost impossible to detect. So before we get into the demo, I just want to kind of show you one of the things that we did. And this really is not the true purpose of this presentation, is to talk about this data warehouse that we created. But I think it's pretty important to point out, because a lot of the success that we've had as an agency has basically been the result of us creating this centralized financial data warehouse. We call it the Integrated Resource Management System, okay? And really, why we at first created this financial data warehouse is we all have accounting systems, and our accounting system at HHS works perfect. We have complete reliability with the data. It's highly secure. It's accessible. It's logical. Everything about it is very, very good. So we're very pleased. But think about an accounting system. It can, if you run a report to know the availability of funds or how much funds have been spent, it only knows what it's obligated, what it's processed. What it will never know is the pipeline before it. And for us, we have a pipeline of many other feeder systems that commit the federal government to an award, to some sort of financial activity. It could be a grant. It could be a scholarship. It could be a credit card purchase. It could be travel. It could be payroll. So what happens in these systems, there is an entire workflow and process to verify and approve those transactions, and then it gets handed off through an interface to our accounting system. And the accounting system has its own roles and workflow, and eventually it will be approved. But what we see is there's a lag of a couple weeks. It could be a day, it could be a couple weeks. And what that does is that gives us a blind spot financially, because we don't know what's in the queue. All we know is what's obligated. So this system originally was conceived to give us insight into, now let's know how much we've already committed versus what's been allocated, so we know exactly how much is available, okay? But it's become so much more, because within those data extracts that we receive from each of these systems on a daily basis, we have the most valuable information of all, and it's the contextual information. It's like going from a black and white world. It's like when you step into Oz. You remember Wizard of Oz? And it was like, Oz, it was colorful, and it went from black and white. You have all the attributes associated with those transactions that an accounting system would never have, would never need to know. So you have information about who did the review and approval, period of performances with start dates and end dates. And as we get into the financial internal controls, you'll start to realize how important that's become with some of the work we've done. And now what we've done is through Tableau, is a BI platform for us, we've been able to not only leverage what we have with our integrated resource management system, our financial data warehouse, we're joining many other data sources in. Sometimes we just do not need to receive the extract and keep it in our data warehouse. We'll reach out to those database servers directly. All right, so I've got about 7 different dashboards we're going to show you, and they kind of progress in a level of maturity, okay? So the first one has to do with, I call this one the checkbook ledger. does everybody even remember the days when we used to use checkbook ledgers, okay? That, for people that don't, you would write when you have a deposit, how much money, and then every time you withdrew money or wrote a check, you'd scratch it and you deduct it, you'd know how much is there. But remember, when you would write that, the bank hadn't cleared your check yet, but you pretended it did, right? Because you didn't want to overspend. You didn't want to become anti-deficient. And at the federal level, anti-deficiency is, almost a criminal offense, and it certainly will cost many people their jobs. So what this does is, simple of a dashboard as it is, it might have been our most important dashboard because it tells me to the minute I have $1.7 billion available, okay? And I said we have a $13 billion budget, but we are on a continuing resolution, so we only get a portion of our budget. That's how the federal government works. And when you're on a continuing resolution, it's based on last year's budget for X number of days. It's simple math. And I can see of that, we have already obligated close to $117 million. Now, this is really good because what this would give is this gives our organization the ability to see by appropriation. Now, the federal government is very complicated because I can't mix the money. If I receive an appropriation from Congress, it tells you specifically exactly what you can use it for. So you cannot take, hey, well, there's $1 million unspent from our maternal and child health side. Let's help the people that need community health centers. You can't do it. That would be against the appropriation rules. So what we have given our executives, and this is an internal dashboard that are used by all staff, but certainly resonates most with our executives, the ability for them to drill into and see where the monies are. And you could see, like here's a pipe. I call this like one of my pipeline examples. There's $2 million that is somewhere in that process of, it's been committed through one of our systems, hasn't yet hit the accounting system, but that's very relevant. And so this tool was our jumping spot into Tableau leveraging it. And we've used this for several years, and it's still probably our most commonly viewed dashboard. But now this one is an example of a dashboard that we have that now starts to serve up information to our much more budget, finance-minded people, okay? And what it intends to do is look at financial activities for a particular year. In this case, it's FY, fiscal year 2020. And you could see it tries to capture and portray at a high level the number of transactions that have been processed in our accounting system at the point in time, which is today, and how much of that has been obligated, okay, which means the accounting system has approved it. And what it also gives us is the ability to find some things that look like, these are some transactions that might not look quite right for a number of reasons. So I'll show you a couple examples. So we talk about, I use this term commitment, and that's when our feeder systems are making an award, okay? And that's a commitment. The government stands behind it. It's a commitment. It's been authorized. It just hasn't been obligated by our accounting system. So if I want to look at just open commitments, and that just means we're going to look at everything that has been processed and approved by a transactional system but has never hit the accounting system yet. And you could start to see, obviously it's going to always be null because there is no obligation date. And you could start to see things. We can see, well, okay, there's a couple commitments that were just on November 7th. Today's probably the 13th. Maybe that makes sense. But then you can start to say, now, I want to focus on why do we have commitments that are greater than 30 days old, This could be any number. It could be 90 days. It could be 120. So for the purpose of this demonstration, let's pick 30. So you can see you have some commitments that are made in this fiscal year, which begins in October for us. And a lot of times what they are is there's good reasons for this. You could have a travel request that the traveler has not yet, has been authorized, committed by a system, hasn't submitted the invoices, so the obligation hasn't been made yet. And then you have others that could cause some alarm, where we can see commitments that crossed over fiscal years. So these are probably transactions that need to be closed out. There's something that went awry. And so this has become a tool for our budget staff and our budget execution folks to be able to clean up and potentially close out erroneous transactions. Okay? Now here's part of what we talk about, or I mentioned earlier, is internal controls. So for us at the federal level, one of our most scrutinized internal controls has to do with the use of prior year funds. So I talked a bit about the appropriation process, and when we get an appropriation from Congress, a lot of times it's literally the money is only good for 1 year. It's 1 year money. And in a perfect world, you get it on October 1, and by September 30th, the year's done. And if you go past September 30th of that next year, you can. There's some exceptions. If there's a bona fide need and it passes the bona fide need test, there might be permissible uses of it. But a lot of times, they require close review and inspection. All right, so what we have here is an illustration of this is all funds. So say we just want to look at, there's a lot of, I'll call these positive. These are not the de-obligations, just positive ones. And I want to look at prior year. And what you could begin to see, and of course, this data obviously has been masked for what I'm presenting here today. And there's actually a certain entire section here that had to be modified out, because what we use this for is to identify if there's, the initial way to identify, are there any transactions that don't pass the reasonable eye test, okay? We have, as you can see here, most of these use of prior year funds are overwhelmingly going to be in the field of financial assistance. Well, so not only are there more numbers, but the dollars are probably pretty significant as well. So what we have enabled our staff to do is start to, at a high level, this is the beginning process of drilling into the information, okay? We could see I selected the month of March, and you can start to look and see appropriations that were used. So in this case, this was a fiscal year. This 17 represents the fiscal year. So we know they're using a prior year fund in March for a relatively large financial assistance award. And we have other systems that we can cross-validate. We have an entire workflow system that captures where our CFO has to review and approve. And for purposes of this presentation, it was too difficult to mask all of that. So I'm going to bypass that particular one, and I'm going to show you the progression of what we were able to begin to do by collecting what I call the contextual information from our feeder systems. So, and this is as simplistic as it can get. This is where an accounting system doesn't know any of the backdrop or history about a contract or a credit card or a grant transaction. But because I collect an extract file for every transaction, and in one of the variables I receive is a budget start and a budget end, or a project start, project end, I have the ability to run simple, Tableau report that will basically tell me, are there any transactions that are occurring now that are after the end date of a particular transaction? So you could see. At the very bottom, we see an obligation date of September 22 of 2017, but yet the program and contract end date was March 31, 2014. So again, and I would tell you, in this case, that's a highly unusual circumstance, and one that would certainly be moved immediately to like an audit team, or an internal controls and audit team, to get to the bottom of it. And so, again, this data has been masked, obviously, and these are not particulars, but I wanted to at least shed some light. And this could be anything. This is just using basic information from a centralized data repository, using some of the variables to aid our internal review auditors or accountants in performing their job. Okay? So this dashboard here has to do with credit card activity. And what we do is on a nightly basis, we receive an extract from our credit card system, and it will tell us, all the day's transactions. And with that file, we have attributes such as not just the purchaser of the transaction, but the merchant, the item that was purchased, the dates. With the dates, the day of the week. In the government, most government operations are Monday through Friday for most agencies, so weekend transactions would probably jump out as something as being unusual. We have other ones where we look at holiday transactions, Christmas, Thanksgiving, things like that. Federal government's closed, why would they be using a credit card? But what this also does is, so I'll give you an example. So we have the ability to drill in, and again, what we're seeing here is data that's coming from multiple systems. We have data behind the scenes from our accounting system that shows us how much has been obligated, and then the transactional systems themselves. And so you have the ability to gain some, just with after reloads, just some basic insights into the transaction. This will load. I know it will. Okay. Hold on, guys. All right. So what we have here is, and if this doesn't work, I'm going to have to skip off of this here because I don't want to tie us up on one feature. So what it should be pulling up and showing right here is some of the contextual information about the purchaser, the merchant, the date, what is the item description, okay? And so it gives that reviewer, that internal controls reviewer, or the manager, some insights as to what their staff are doing, whether or not these are appropriate, whether or not they have any concerns with this. But what I also want to show you is some of the clever things that Tableau has, through some calculated fields, has really enabled us to pick up some really interesting outliers, okay? And there's something, are any of you familiar with the concept of split purchases? So if you're a card holder and you have a single item limit, so say your single item limit is $5,000. And if something costs $6,000, you can't use your credit card for it, and you'd have to run it through the contract shop, and contract shops are very slow. And so a lot of times, well-intended folks might start to skirt the rules and say, hey, is there any way, merchant A, that we could split this? Just give me two separate transactions. So that's $6,000 could become 4,500, and then a second transaction, 1,500. So I was under threshold, you know. But the federal government has pretty strict guidance on that, and it certainly disallows that. So what we've done is we've applied some logic that is basically saying if the same person has a purchase from the same merchant on the same day and it exceeds their single item limit, show it to him. And so what we have is we have the ability to, you know, automatically and constantly, and I always call them as potentially above. So you have the ability to see, okay, we have some instances here where you could see there was a total of a $4,300, $4,400 item that was purchased from the same vendor, and that very much would look like a split purchase, okay? And so would certainly require additional steps from our review team and auditors, because that would clearly meet the looking a little squirrely rule for sure. What I have here is one of the kind of the more interesting ways that we began to use Tableau to examine and identify trends as they're occurring, okay? Everybody wants to be ahead of the curve with, oh man, you know, do we have a wave of activities or transactions that are potentially moving us in the wrong direction? Or how can we predict it? Or how can we get ahead of the curve? And so what we did here, and I'm going to hold my breath that this is going to load because this one is actually pretty neat, is it plots, it's using a scatter plot of every invoice that we pay, okay? And it's not just the amount, it's the processing time of those invoices. We are required by law, there's a law that's called the Prompt Payment Act. And what that means is the federal government has 30 days to pay any commercial invoice, period. And if you don't pay it in 30 days, you're going to have an interest penalty that will be paid. So if you have a $100,000 invoice and it's paid in 60 days, you're going to have 30 days of interest you're paying. And so that could end up costing, you know, hundreds, if not, in some instances, when the invoices are very large, you could be spending thousands of dollars on these late interest penalties. Late interest penalties are a very strong indication of poor processing, to be honest. And so and I might have to bag it if I can't connect here, what this dashboard has is it shows over a period of time every single invoice that took place over a period of 4 years, and it will identify by color if it's above the 30 days or below the 30 days. And more importantly, there's the moving average that goes with it. And literally, when we applied the 30-day moving average, when the average 30-day moving average was greater than 30, it was an immediate indicator. We got a problem absolutely on us right now. And that was the impetus to basically what we'd call the actionable insight that required about 4 different business partners to come together to try to remediate it. And I'm going to go to the remediation because this is not going to render for me here, I do not believe. And I hope I don't have a connectivity issue. I'm going to try to let this run itself out. I know I got my guy Mike back here with Tableau, but I'm not going to call him yet. I think I can just cancel it. All I want to do is go to the next dashboard. All right. Okay, I'm going to just advance it. All right, sorry guys, I hate to tie you up. This is not what I wanted. Because these are some of the more interesting ones. Now this one is going to render, it's a little simpler. So based on the previous one, we identified we had a problem, okay? It was a scatter plot. We saw a trend line. The trend line indicated, oh my gosh, we are so far above what is an acceptable amount of time to process and pay commercial invoices. We have a problem. So this was a dashboard that was put together pulling data from several different data sources, to be honest. And what it starts to convey to us is a little bit of the workflow, and it gives the insight into potential, some root cause analysis. And I'll talk you through this. So the center of the screen, it basically shows the 4 roles that are involved with this. And this could be any workflow process. This particular one has to do with the invoice review. And so it's a 4-leg stool. We have a project officer, or what we call a contracting officer representative, is the first leg of the stool. We have a contract specialist who works in a contract shop. We have a budget office and an accounting group that ultimately pays. So what this does is this is going to just show some averages over a period of time, right? So if we just want to highlight FY15, we can start to see the amount of time associated with each person in the role, just basic averages, okay? And we have a dash or a worksheet beneath it that's showing you, giving you a picture, a bar chart of how many of them visually, just to eyeball, how many of them are to the left of the 30-day prompt payment, how many are to the right. And we start to click through this, and what you could see immediately from 15 to 14 is our accounting group had just a significant jump where the average went from 6 days to about 14 days, all right? So there's clearly a sign of a problem, of where a bottleneck is occurring. And you're starting to see by underneath that there are certainly a gaining number of transactions that are going beyond the 30-day timeline. As we move through it, we still have evidence of it. Yeah, there's some minor improvement, maybe not as quite in sync with the other legs of the stool. And then ultimately, we're starting to see because corrections were taken. This has been modified data based upon what we did. But it's succinct to say that this kind of was a situation that we had some experience manipulating, and it required the 4 groups to sit at the table and come up with a strategy to discuss how are we going to change this? What needs to be done? Is it a resource issue? And then you could see by the time we got to this year, the numbers actually got to a very acceptable level. And this was important for us. What it also gave us is it gave us insights into the organization that had the lion's share. And what we quickly realized is this leg of the stool was so much out of proportion from the rest of our agency. And part of it was they have centralized a lot of the project management responsibilities. So by centralizing it, instead of having a decentralized management, when the invoices are submitted, before they can review and approve them, they push them back out to have people at a local level review, make sure it seems reasonable, and then they go ahead and approve it. But that added almost like a 5th leg to a process. And so what we were able to do was make some administrative improvements to how that workflow needed to be modified, and it's been successful. But that is a very interesting way. Tableau has been very, very paramount in our ability to review workflows in areas such as like segregation of duties and a lot of different spaces that you wouldn't naturally think of based upon whether it be roles, whether it be dates and times and processing. We've really had the opportunity to automate much of our internal controls. Instead of randomly sampling activities, we do targeted sampling based upon some of the outliers that Tableau identifies for us. All right, this is perfect. I just want to spend the last couple minutes talking to you guys a little bit about what we're doing with enterprise risk management. For us, this is like it's almost like a big tsunami that's starting. You could feel it growing behind you. We have a lot of Office of Management and Budget, that's the president's arm, is put forward a lot of requirements and rules for the federal agencies to implement sound ERM principles. And so for us, what that means is the CFO is actually responsible for taking the lead in this. What we have found to be very successful, and I will show you, is to try to create a methodology where if you have a partner or someone that wants to work with you and is willing to work with you, there's a very good chance that you will have some semblance of success working with them, as opposed to those forced agreements or arrangements. So what we did is, the very first thing is we found a champion for our ERM, and our champion is our Chief Financial Officer, and she supports it, and she supports wanting to implement it by using data, okay? So we were very fortunate from the top to have a champion supporting it. Second thing was to leverage tools. The tools that we're using principally are Tableau. The willing partnership, I can't express how important that is with any project. For you guys know this better than anyone. Any type of IT or non-IT, if you have willing partnership, it goes a very long way. But there has to be the value. If you really want, if I can give you something that you can't do on your own and I can offer it up to you, in this case, it's analytics. We can offer you the ability to perform some analytics that other parts of my organization either don't have the staffing or capacity or skill sets or the ability to join and do the enterprise data management. If we can offer that up to you, there's something in it. They benefit. They stand to benefit. And so what we did is we developed a proof of concept, which I'll show you, and communicate, as always. So initially, what we planned to do and what we did work on is, should have spelled it out, it's human resources. And that is always a top challenge of every organization. And when we talk about risks, let me be crystal clear. There are so many levels of sub-risks that can be associated with a domain, okay? So what we did is we met with the subject matter expert within the human resources group and basically said, you tell us what are the risks that concern you the most? What are the things that, from your experience, that give you concern that the rest of the agency isn't aware of and that you feel like we need to make them aware? And what we got was a lot of different data sets, okay? And these were data sets that came from various places. Some came from departmental systems. Some came from the Office of Personnel Management. Some of them come from an employee viewpoint survey, so they're survey results that the federal government offers, but it's our data, and they are willing to serve it up to us. So we had all these different boxes of data that, and certainly we got information about retirement, okay? And I'll show you why that became so important. So this is the ugliest thing we ever saw, but this is precisely, and I'll start to show you how this works. This is precisely what the customer wanted. Wrote it on the board. I kept it up in my office. Wrote it on the board. He wants a way to show the planned employee turnover intention. Okay, this is self-reported data. They plan to retire. So the left axis will show you the percent that say, yes, I am, or not to retire, to leave the employer within the next 12 months. So you can see that about 33% responded, I plan to leave in the next 12 months, okay? And what he really wanted to express is the size of the circles were the number of staff in those organizations, because in his mind, it's relevant, it's very important to know which organizations based on skill, composition of staff, size of staff. But then, this is where it actually got a little bit interesting, because what really he wanted the ability to do, and I'm just going to select one here, is to be able to see the relationships of within this organization. So I'm going to highlight one because it's a little easier to see. So this organization has about a 32%, so about on par with the rest of the agency, that say at this bureau level, we have 32 of our 341 staff, they plan to hit the road. And you could see, like most organizations, you're comprised of many divisions within that. And you have some divisions that respond, unfortunately, very high. Like 44% are saying, I want to leave. Now, I think we can all start, not without even being an HR professional. There's probably some reasons. Maybe the work could be mundane, they're not challenged, possibly. Maybe it's a division director. So maybe it's a tough person to work with. Could be a lot of factors. And then you could see all the way on the flip side is, this is great. You literally have 0% that want to leave. I mean, so that's like the poster child of what you want. That's fantastic. So what this began to do, and this has been, obviously the legends will show you the Greek alphabet, but underlying this is real data, very real. And this became incredibly insightful and, an interesting discussion amongst executive management, okay? And so once we served this up, they said, that really wasn't the only risk we really had, though. So we realized we need another sub-risk because this is only telling us such a small sliver. Let's talk about, everyone talks about this wave of retirements that are going to hit the federal government. Well, let's talk about that. And so, again, following a somewhat similar model, what was requested was the ability to see, based on retirement eligibility, which can be computed, okay? It's obviously a lot of factors go into retirement eligibility. It's your age, it's your years of service, and then there's magic numbers that come into play here. And so what they said is, hey, is there any way we could see it visually? Like, can we plot this where the bottom axis here says, like, I've got 30 years left for this person, 26-year-old. So that's probably would make about sense. And 30 years to retirement. But then all the way across the axes, you start to see the ones that we have to worry about. If you're in terms of succession planning, obviously. And what you begin to see and the size of the bodies are based on their grade level. Okay, so that's in the federal government, our salaries are by grades. And so the higher the number, the higher the grade. And in theory, the more impactful their departure would be, in theory. Not always, but in theory, it would be that way. The color is simple. Red is a supervisor. So you could really start to say, now, the ones that are going to really potentially we need to be primed for are people that are retirement eligible, which I thought was now, like someone like a retirement eligible supervisory public health person. And they said, what's really important is this magic line, and it's this 3-year line, because there's statistics that we've run that show people don't retire on the day they're eligible, to retire. They usually stick it out a little bit. But when they get to 3 years, they're really ready. And that's for us at our agency, that's the magic number. Now, what this enabled us to do, and again, we could drill in at any level, because just like the previous chart, you have the ability to look at branches, you could look at, and so the managers now have the ability to see their data, and it's not masked, at that level for that executive. They have the ability to see their staff, where they are, and look at it at this level. But guess what else? They have the ability to drill in by series, job series. So you could see, okay, we have 27, and what is that, about a quarter of the workforce there. Maybe that's alarming, maybe not, but maybe you have other categories, like for someone like me, I look at a medical officer, and it's pretty easy to think that it's a little harder probably to hire medical officers than it would be for other job series. But the tool also enabled our management team, the program and the HR side, to see, what's the most beneficial here is they actually had some job series that they're almost very willing to transition out. And so this actually is aiding in the ability to say, we're going to actually move people from series this to series this, and to basically reallocate the personnel. And they're seeing it. This has been useful thus far with succession planning, mid-level, senior-level development programs, okay, to help to compensating control, to mitigating control, right? And so this is the initial crack of what we did with ERM. I will tell you, this is the little people chart. This is how people always say, hey, Joe, can we see the little people chart? This is how they like to refer to this one. So what this did, though, and you guys can understand this because we're all probably in similar positions where we're working with data. I have received so many willing partners now. Now they're very willing because they could come to the table and say, Joe, we think we have something that would be beneficial for you at the enterprise level, and we know we can't do some of the things you're doing. And we're even having partnerships with our security community because they've got some fantastic data. And one of their concerns is getting executive attention, always is. They feel like the information isn't always communicated to the executives, and this could be a channel. So probably in the next 6 months, we will certainly have at least one, if not two other willing partners. So this is kind of like our next steps is to expand it into other business areas. The other thing I think most of us have heard, Tableau itself, the tool is some of the things that we need more, some of the predictive or statistical analytics. My gosh, going through these sessions, I realize how from explain data to ask data, there's a lot that's available already with what I have here. But we certainly even have the need at our level to start doing some RPA tools. I don't know if you all are using that. We have opportunities where we think we could kind of take some next step in some of the process areas that we have. And I think that is it, and I'm probably right on time. And number one, I thank you because that was a bad glitch with my slide, so thank you for hanging in there. And if there's any questions, I think I'm right at the end of time. I guess what you could do, certainly feel free to come up and ask anything if you have anything to ask. Okay, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.